Top Med Talk. Hello, welcome to Top Med Talk. I'm Andy Cumsty, and it's great to be back here at the EBPOM World Congress here in London for EBPOM 2025. And I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Professor Dave Storey, who we last spoke to at the ANZCA ASM in Cairns a few months ago. Welcome to Britain.
Thanks so much, Andy. It's great to be here. It's great to be, in many ways, the epicenter of perioperative medicine worldwide. EBPOM has played a major role in the evolution of perioperative medicine. And one of the great things here has been meeting not only with our colleagues from the UK through CPOC and our American colleagues as well, which has meant that the broadening of the interactions and collaborations has been terrific.
It's been a great day, hasn't it? Day one at the Congress. As you say, real world Congress here with everybody represented. What's been your highlights so far?
It was very interesting to hear my counterpart, the president of the Royal College. She and I had a long talk, just the two of us. It is very clear that both colleges have challenges, particularly in the environments we're working in. One of the mainstays and one of the things we want to put to government is the advantage of perioperative medicine. The other thing is it reinforces the opportunities it provides for the fellows of both colleges. Both colleges have perioperative medicine high on their priority list in our strategic planning.
It'll be really interesting to see how that pans out over the next few years here in the UK and for yourselves.
Yeah, so at ANZCA, we are literally the last stages of our next 3-year plan. We've kept it shorter because there's a lot of change and pressure coming from government, but perioperative medicine will play a major role in that.
And do you see any similarities or differences between yourselves and us here in the UK?
There are many similarities. I guess the biggest difference for Australia and New Zealand, or as we sometimes say, Aotearoa, New Zealand, the Māori name, is really around First Nations people.
Cool.
So I'm from Australia, and New Zealand, or Aotearoa, New Zealand, is a different country with a very strong, large First Nations group being the Māori. If we look at Australia, this week is what is called NAIDOC Week, and that has an interesting history. So almost 100 years ago, Aboriginal people in Australia had a day of mourning around harm that colonisation had done to them. And NAIDOC Week stands for National Aboriginal and Islanders. So we have a second First Nations group in Australia called the Torres Strait Islanders, who are pretty closely related to people from Papua New Guinea. And it's the National Aboriginal and Islander Day of Observation. So they're observing and thinking about the challenges that it had. NAIDOC is really now both a celebration of our First Nations people, but also around the challenge that they've had. And we talk about the gap in outcomes. So First Nations people, both in Australia and Aotearoa, New Zealand, have worse outcomes, with life expectancy and clinical outcomes, diabetes being a big issue, similar to other First Nations people, say, such as those in North America. And so one of the projects I've been very happy to be involved with, one of my colleagues, Edith Waugh, who's a fellow of our college, works in Darwin. About 60% of the inpatients are, in fact, Indigenous people, First Nations people. And Edith has been very interested. She actually runs the Indigenous Perioperative Clinic, so specifically for Indigenous people. This is one of the biggest differences, I think, between the UK and Australia and Aotearoa, New Zealand. Who, as part of NAIDOC Week, the Medical Journal of Australia has published papers around healthcare for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. And one of those papers is from Edith about the perioperative pathway for First Nations people. It's a qualitative paper. I'm very pleased to be one of the authors because I'm one of Edith's PhD supervisors, and it really focuses around the needs of Indigenous people. If we look at what makes Aboriginal identity, one of my colleagues who's a cardiologist who's Indigenous talked about the 3 C's, which is country, culture, and community. And country is incredibly important to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, but particularly Aboriginal people. And so Edith is trying to work with First Nations people in her area. And she's looked at what are the factors. And this is one of the things that really comes back to this meeting is trust. The number one thing is trust. And I think we've had a lot of discussions today where we've talked about this, where our patients trust us. And this is what Edith's particularly talking about here, but also that we trust each other. So I think that is an interesting reflection on caring for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders during NAIDOC Week. The other thing that is very important for First Nations people generally is family and community. And so integrating them into our perioperative systems is really, really important. And we also see that in other groups in both Australia and Aotearoa and New Zealand. So ANZCA recognises three broad groups. We formally identify as seeing priority people. One is, as I said, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders in Australia. In New Zealand, there are Māori, and the group known as Pacifica, which are people from the Pacific Islands. And in our formal introductions, we will actually recognise them first in any meeting, anything like that. And they are three groups that are culturally different but have many similar problems. And so this is, I guess, again, going back to the issue around the big difference between Australia and New Zealand and the UK and how we work with our First Nations people. The other, I think, similarity that you would have in the UK that we also have, particularly in Australia, is our other culturally and linguistically diverse groups. And working with our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities also reminds us there are other communities where language, but particularly culture, is really, really important.
I love that 3 C's. I think that's a really powerful statement. And, so we've met a couple of times now. I've been very fortunate to come to your annual scientific meeting the last 2 years in Brisbane and then in Cairns. And both those meetings opened with a very powerful sing of the land that we were sitting on from the Aboriginal people. And again, next year, that meeting's moved to Auckland. So again, already from the welcome videos, there's a big Maori theme to that. It's really, really impressive how you've managed to kind of start to bring that more into the mainstream for everybody in the perioperative community.
We've tried very hard as a college to do that. I'm incredibly pleased. You can actually Google it. You can look at our college bulletin on the front page. You can see a picture of me as president. But probably more importantly, it is an annual scientific meeting. We had a ceremony for our new fellows, and one of our fellows is Aboriginal. He put on face paint. I saw him sort of coming up, and he came up to me. I stuck my hand out, and he said, "I'm not going to do a white fella handshake." And we did more sort of like a bro handshake, sort of with the thumbs. And there's just this fantastic photograph. We got this big cheer, and I thought, he is an Aboriginal fellow of our college, felt empowered to wear face paint and say what he said. And I reflected later, I thought, over the last 200 years, how many Aboriginal people have shaken the hand of a white man and been completely done over afterwards? And I really, when I reflected on what he said, I thought I can just completely understand where he's coming from. Yeah.
You may not realise this, but I remember that being talked about at the meeting for the next day, 2 days after that event. It was such a big symbolic, but actually really pleasant, positive gesture.
There's just this beautiful photograph that the peak moment of my presidency, not only for me as an individual, but I think for our college so much. We've come so far. One of the issues we have in Australia at the moment, and also in New Zealand, is a perception by government that we are basically a bunch of conservative old white blokes who are resistant to all change. I really felt this is a representation of how far we've moved, particularly in the last quarter century.
And I think it's interesting to look ahead to how it's going to change going forward as well. Claire's has presented some very powerful statistics about, male, female and balance in our workforce in the UK, how at the moment, actually, it's almost equal now, but our medical school intakes are now 60% female in 2023. So, you talk about this bunch of old white blokes. That's not the face of perioperative medicine anymore. That's great.
We did a very large fellowship survey, and there's quite a marked gender difference, in terms of the priority as a college, and proportionally more women than men say it's a significant priority. The exact reasons, I could think of all sorts of reasons to speculate, but I won't. But I'm also very mindful that a number of our colleagues did a survey of women in the anaesthesia workforce in Australia and found there are disparities. They had a quantitative paper and then a qualitative paper. And the qualitative paper showed that there is still major gender bias in anaesthesia in Australia and New Zealand, Aotearoa, New Zealand. But it's interesting, some of the pushback. I was just talking about, we still have particularly older men in our college who don't think diversity is a problem. It reflects Australian society. If you looked at the attitudes and voting and everything else, older men are more conservative. ANZCA probably represents that. We're not different. We're not special. But what I've said to people who push back a bit, is the college too woke? The good thing is we have large numbers of our fellows in a survey to say, well, in fact, more than half of all fellows see diversity is important, but somewhat interestingly, it's about 50% of men, but 75% of women. So there's this big gender difference which again, I think reinforces the whole proposition that there are still major issues around gender equity in Australian anaesthesia. The college is working very hard on this. I actually reject the idea that it's something we shouldn't be involved in, that we're not just being woke, as some say, which is a phrase I hate. This really is around fairness. We have a literal legal concept in Australia called the fair go, which came from an industrial. And I see this as a big part of the fair go for women, is really looking at taking equity rather than just an equality approach.
And we should say at this point, I mean, someone we both know very closely, but Professor Kate Leslie, who's done a lot of the work on Top Med Talk Down Under, and a lot of other shows, Top Med Talk, this is a topic that she's very, very passionate about and done a lot of work for over the years, and has covered on this series on Top Med Talk before as well. And I've been to a few of the sessions that you hold at the ASM now about the Women in Anaesthesia group, and they're always really, really powerful sessions. But I've got to confess, there's not normally many men in the room.
It's an interesting thing. I think some men who support equity feel that they may not be wanted. I know is untrue, but I think it's a bit of a cognitive bias. It's a bit hard to get over. I went to the sessions, probably the same ones you did, and it's very welcoming for all.
Yeah, agreed.
And look, the majority of our committee members are women at the moment, but I think as men become more comfortable in engaging on this topic and not being frightened, I think we're making progress. Yeah. I am a big believer in evolution rather than revolution. I think there is an ongoing evolution, but I think the College of Anaesthetists of Australia and New Zealand is making major advances in an appropriate equity approach to things. If I just may also say, the other group associated with this, and that's why I was so pleased when we had Jean, our Aboriginal fellow, come through, is we're very keen to support Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders come into fellowship. We have about 40 Māori fellows, about 40 Māori trainees, I think, but we have relatively few Aboriginal fellows, and we really do need to take a very strong equity approach to them, almost what I'd call a concierge approach, and there's one particular young doctor, and she wants to come into the training program, so I've written a letter of support pointing out to the selection panel that, acknowledging her Indigenous status is part of college policy, the policy of the Australian Medical Council, who accredits us, the federal government, and then what's called the Closing the Gap policy as well. So they're the sort of things I think we can do as a college to support First Nations people to come into fellowship, which we're incredibly keen to do.
I'm really pleased you brought it back to the First Nations approach. I was about to ask you about that again. I think just to finish, you're obviously in a very enviable but maybe unenviable position of being the leader of the college and having this sort of in the centre of everyone's attention. But there's lots of other people here at this meeting and other meetings who are leaders in their own way in their own organisations. That might be leading their own theatre list or the theatre team, or it might be leading the whole department in a university hospital. But how do we all mirror these behaviours and push this diversity issue forward, whether that's male-female equity or whether it's ethnic minorities, or what behaviour should we be modelling to really make inclusivity a fairer playing field amongst our teams?
I don't know if there's one easy answer. It is just being supportive. It's probably what not to do, which is just don't block.
Yeah.
Don't stand up and say, you're just all being woke. No. Just say, okay, let's give it a go. And probably not blocking, or at least allowing it to happen. There will be those of us who will be taking active roles, and allowing those taking active roles to do that without blocking is probably the first step. And you would hope that eventually there'll be greater acceptance of far more people taking active roles. So to answer your question, Annie, don't block those of us trying to take active roles.
Perfect. Thank you very much for your time, David. Thank you for joining us here on Top Med Talk. Thank you for making it over to the UK. Hopefully I'll see you back in Australia and New Zealand very, very soon. In the meantime, we should go and join the drinks reception that everybody else is enjoying at the end of day one of the ANZCA World Commons.
Indeed, we should. Thank you very much.
Wow. Another fantastic conversation here on Top Med Talk. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for giving your time. As always, you can find this conversation and all our other conversations on our website, on social media. We're on Facebook, X, Blue Sky, Instagram, YouTube. If you go to those sites, please do give us a thumbs up, hit subscribe. It really does matter and make a difference to us. You'll find us all on your podcaster of choice as well. And finally, of course, we couldn't do this without the help of our fantastic sponsors, who this year are BD and GE. and they really do keep Top Med Talk open access and free around the world.
Top Med Talk.
Thanks for downloading Top Med Talk. Perioperative Profiles is a new series from Top Med Talk which looks at both the professional and personal journey taken by some of the world's most innovative and successful perioperative practitioners and researchers. The series begins next week, where we're going to be talking to Professor Paul Miles, Director of Research in the Department of Anaesthesiology and Perioperative Medicine at the Alfred Hospital in Melbourne and Head of Department at Monash University in Australia. Top Med Talk is the broadcasting arm of EBPOM, Evidence-Based Perioperative Medicine. We'd love you to find out more about that. The place to go, ebpom.org.